Well, thank you, and hello. I lived in Ohio for about 4 years, and that inspired long-distance travel. So here I am. Are there any questions? Simply put, what happened was I found myself spending more and more time doing things I really didn't like anymore, trying to pay for things I really didn't want after all. This is a reasonable summary of the American dream, I think. I worked for myself, but I was chained to a desk like anybody else. I just owned the desk. But somewhere around my 30th birthday, it suddenly dawned on me that this was really potentially pathological. I didn't like my neighbors. I didn't like my riding lawnmower. I didn't like my house. And so I decided to see if I could take all of my passions and blend them into a lifestyle somehow. So I listed them as travel and adventure, of course, and computers and bicycles and ham radio and romance and learning and all these kinds of things. And I stared at the list, and the obvious solution was to build a computer into a bicycle, take off, travel full-time while writing about it for a living. So I did. I built the first bike back in 1983. It was called the Winnebago. And I did about that name occurred to me at a bizarre encounter in Texas. I just finished filming for CBS Morning News a few months later. It didn't start out as the Winnebago, and they finally left me alone, and I was camped by this quiet little lake in Lake Livingston, Texas, and a big motorhome pulled in next to me, and I heard this whir as the satellite dish went up, so you could watch television, and then this sort of clunk as the hydraulic step went down, and this very large person backed out of the motorhome wrestling with an object with tubing and wheels and things. And I finally realized it was a lawn boy lawnmower, and he mowed the grass around his campsite. And then he told me that he came up from Houston to get away from it all. So kind of, as a joke, I called the bike the Winnebago. But anyway, I did about 10,000 miles. I wrote a book about it, Computing Across America. But somewhere in West Texas, it dawned on me that I had this one slight problem, is I couldn't write while riding. And every 10,000 miles is 1,000 hours, which, as you know, is about half of a business year. And I was a hand-to-mouth freelance writer, so that's a pretty expensive investment. And I started fantasizing about having a keyboard in the handlebars so I could type in binary. So the Winnebago 2 was born, and based on the fact that I play the flute, I built a chord keyboard so I could ride along on the bike and type there used to be a little Radio Shack Model 100 in the console about 6 years ago, and I could ride along and write stories and things like that. And I did that for about another 6,000 miles and covered both coasts, and now I was up to about 16,000 total. But the problem with that machine was that it was architecturally inflexible, and every time I wanted to change it, I was editing with a soldering iron. That's really an ugly way to edit. So this is BEHEMOTH. BEHEMOTH, as you may know, is an acronym. It stands for Big Electronic Human Energized Machine, only too heavy. It's 580 pounds fully loaded. The wazoo back here, the wheeled auxiliary storage unit, contains all my pack space. And the lid of it is solar panels. There's 72 watts of solar panels there that power everything except the wheels. The wheels are actually solar powered too because I'm part of the food chain. But there's all sorts of good electronics on here, basic essentials. We are. The most important part. It's a CD player. Computers are great, but that's what gets me up the hills. It's 105 speeds. That's the other thing that gets me up the hills. It's a 5x3x7 matrix. And here, let me just show you what it looks like when I'm sitting on it. Why are you laughing? This is the brain interface unit I just put on here. I pulled into a Taco Bell in Seattle on this, in the drive-in window. And the woman looked a little bit taken aback, and I just turned to her very impassively and I said, "Give me a burrito. Resistance is futile." I can feel lightheaded just by throwing a switch. There's also a heads-up display. This is a 720 by 280 computer screen called the Private Eye, and this is run by a little DOS system behind the seat here. There's another little window in my virtual reality that gives me the view of the world behind me. There's a boom microphone as well as a couple speakers for cellular phone and ham radio. And these little sensors here are ultrasonic sensors for the cursor positioner, so that on the Macintosh, since I don't have room for a regular mouse, as I move my head around, the mouse just tracks my head movement. The problem that it happens occasionally is sort of this, after many hours of editing, as I'm riding along, I went through Sheboygan, Wisconsin on this, and I'd been editing, working on a story for a few hours, and I was going down the street, and put gently, there was somebody walking down the street who I found quite fascinating and wanted to look at, and so I turned, and I'm trying to double-click, you know, and launch this application, but unfortunately, that interface doesn't work that way. It's kind of what it feels like, actually, strangely enough. You see, what it feels like is reality. Is of course the source of non-maskable interrupts like trucks and things like that, and so that's root, and we have to always keep that. But what it ends up feeling like is all these little windows. You can't really see the console where you're sitting, but there's a Macintosh screen here, and it flips up. It's mechanical display paging. There's a VGA display under it, and then another little DOS screen and some other stuff as well as the heads up. And they sort of feel like windows in a windowing environment. And in really boring places, it would be really nice if I could have sort of swap them around and take, you know, a boring little country road someplace across Kansas and put it into a heads-up display and have my page layout program or my CAD system occupy this full view. But I can't do that. There is one other thing that goes in the helmet. There's, you see this tubing here, there's a little pump right here, and there's a heat exchanger that I wear inside the helmet, and that lets me pull about 75 watts out of my head on a hot day. I was riding along in Iowa, western Iowa in July about 3 years ago, and it was brutally hot. It was about 100 degrees, and I had some jazz going on the stereo, and I was editing something on the Mac with about, I don't know, 24-point type or something, so it was real painless. And running the helmet coolers. I'm just all cool and relaxed and having a wonderful time, and these other cyclists pulled up alongside, and they're all sweating lycra and, you know, really working. And they slowed down, of course, to look me over, and one of them looked at me and says, "Pardon me, do you have any Grey Poupon?" So I now carry these little packets anyway, communications is really the big thing here. Back when I started all this, back in '83, it was real exciting to people that I had a computer on a bicycle. And that's never really been the point. It's nice to be able to edit and do all my work, but just like any networking environment where you have computers scattered around some operation, they get interesting when you connect them together. It's like I'm fond of saying that the other 90% of a personal computer is your modem. And it's certainly the case on the bike. I do a lot of editing on the bike. There's control systems built in that take care of things like power management and security and all that, which I'll tell you in a second. But the key thing is being able to connect to the rest of the world while I'm nomadic. Since the idea is my home is internet and physical location is irrelevant. There's wow, we've changed elevation, excuse me. There. This is a satellite Earth station. The bike always knows where it is, and it's always connected to a Spark station at Qualcomm in San Diego via the GTE G-Star satellite. So as I'm riding along, this thing looks around, finds the satellite, locks on, and all my email goes through. I use Eudora on the Macintosh, and so I can send and receive mail while I'm traveling. It's a relatively slow path. It's only 165 bits per second, which is a bit on the clunky side if you have options. But sometimes when you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't have options. When I do have options, I use the cellular modem, and I can run about 10K baud, you know, with Cell Blazer. There's also ham radio. There's a whole ham station in the back, which gives me lots of communications. And there's even a data link between backpack and bike. So I can be away from the bike and talk to it. There's even a Spark station here. I've always wanted to try riding a Unix cycle. And, so that's why I do this, you know. It's just such a rich source of potential puns. I mentioned security a moment ago. Somewhere along the way, this estimate came up that the bike was worth about $1.2 million. Well, you know, it's kind of a bogus number. I have about 150 corporate sponsors. In fact, I understand many of you are with some of the companies who've helped make this possible. But if you look at the value of all the stuff and the time that went into it, it's expensive, and I wouldn't want to lose it. So leaving it parked someplace where I can't keep an eye on it always makes me a little bit uneasy. So the security system has 6 different levels of sensors. There's a microwave motion sensor right here behind the seat that knows if anybody's within about 10 or 15 feet. In most cases, that's not considered an alert, like being parked in front of a restaurant. There's a physical motion sensor that sees this kind of movement. It knows if the wheels are moving, if any access panels being opened like this, if cables are being unplugged, or if the latitude and longitude are changing without the right password. This is a GPS receiver here from Trimble. And if that happens, the processor is a little 68HC11 in there that responds to that. It dials 911 on the cellular phone. And the speech synthesizer says, hello, I'm a bicycle, I'm being stolen, my present coordinates are latitude, da, 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 et cetera. Fortunately, this hasn't yet happened. I'm not quite sure what the police dispatchers would do with it, but it's amusing to think about. So it really hasn't been much of a problem. So actually, so this whole thing's been going on now for about 10 years, and the present status of this whole project now is that I'm now doing something different. I started falling in love with water. Somebody turned me on to kayaking a couple of years ago, so I started getting excited about that and decided to put all this into a kayak, and then discovered that it wouldn't float. Incidentally, this whole thing has sort of taken the shape of a research project in which the conclusion is what I now call the Roberts Law of Applied Mobile Gizmology. And that is, if you take an infinite number of very light things and put them together, they become infinitely heavy. So what's happened with the boat, it's now called the Microship, or the CMOS Microship. That's S-E-A-M-O-S-S. And there's a whole network of processors on that, and it's now under construction at UCSD in San Diego, where I'm living for about 2 years. I've helped from a bunch of students. And we're doing the same basic thing, but again, you know, the technology keeps evolving, of course. So here we are in 1994, yes, 4. And it's time to do it all over and do it fresh again. So there's a whole network of processors on there. There's, I think, 11 68HC11s, all multitasking on a multi-drop network that all take care of things like audio and serial cross-point switching. There's a video turret. There's, what else is on there? Oh yes, there's 660 watts of solar panels which can propel the boat as well as a small sail. And I can pedal the boat as well as run it under those other 2 modes. All of that stuff is controlled by this whole low-level network. And then we have machines in the console and graphic user interfaces and so on. So it's, I tried growing up and just didn't like it. And every time the option of settling down and presents itself, I think of some new nomadic twist to it. So that's the quick overview. I can maunder on a little bit more if you like about technical details. But first, do you have any questions about anything I've said so far or the lifestyle itself? This actually will be a beta site for a new networking protocol soon to be announced. And as
how do you do backup?
actually, I have a backup beeper right here. You hear it? There's a. Where's that?
Next question.
I do writes to floppy.
Excellent list application. Well, if you talk to him about Nest after dinner tonight, we'll be able to write this whole thing off.
Right.
Good idea.
Yes, I recommend it. You should get one.
I'd like to know what's the top speed of the bike, and have you ever rode it in Brooklyn?
Second answer, no. First answer, I've had it to 50.5 with a gravity assist. That's down a mountain. That's down a mountain. On level grades, it depends entirely on what I have for breakfast and how motivated I'm feeling at the moment. But 10 to 12 miles an hour is typical. Uphill, and the granny gear, the lowest gear of those 105 is 7.9 inches, and that's 1.2 miles an hour at a cadence of 60.
Hey, what about Brooklyn?
Oh, no, I have not. I did do the Donahue show last year, and there were some real adventures just getting parked in Manhattan, but it was
How big is the kayak compared to Behemoth?
The center hull is 19 feet, and it's 11-foot beam.
It's a trimer at this point.
Yeah, it's a try. Oh.
Having taken the bicycle to Brooklyn, he'd be describing it to you now. Do we have some more questions?
Old photos.
Back over here. Mr. Ewald.
What's your internet address?
Wordy@ucsd.edu. .edu. Yeah. There's a. Yeah, UCSD has hosted the project for about the last year. Here we are.
Technomadic Research Labs. You've reached the cellular phone of board Behemoth, the network frequented bicycle. I'm not on site at the moment, so please leave a message and I'm back on the road. I'll find it and call you back. Thank you.
That's good.
About 30. Your mileage may vary, but I get a better mileage out of pizza. I believe in serviceability. I pulled into a bike shop once and this is really mean. I shouldn't do this, but I had a problem. I trashed a freewheel on a killer hill, and believe it or not, in Illinois. I didn't know they had killer hills in Illinois. It was only about 10 feet high, but I blew it. Anyway, I sort of limped back to this little Schwinn shop and was out in front, and this guy came out, and I'm kind of showing him the thing and opening it up and everything. And I finally said, well, look, I'm here. I got a problem. I've trashed my freewheel. And he goes, oh, we wouldn't have anything like that. And I said, no, it's a Suntour New Winter Pro. It's right here. And he goes, oh, there's just no way we'd have parts for this. And I finally said, look, this right here is broken. He goes, oh, gears. Sure, dude, we got gears. You know, it just didn't occur to him that he might have anything for this. I was uploading a file one day back when I used acoustic couplers, and this was a long time ago, at a payphone in a small farm town in western Ohio, and this farmer pulled up alongside in his pickup truck, and he sort of squeaked over. He was wearing coveralls and chawing tobacco and got the Caterpillar tractor hat and everything, and kind of sauntered over and looked it over and bent down, touched the chain, nodded, you know. Finally, he spat tobacco juice and said, "Are you with NASA?" So I told him it was a loony excursion module. Anyway, the hard disks are all shock mounted. There's a couple of them here, and there's about 720 meg of hard disk total, something like that. But then there's a bicycle control processor here that the access panels unfold. So the whole thing is designed for easy access on the road, and I carry all the tools I need.
I think there were some more questions back here. I know there were more questions. Mark, you had a question? Where are you? Mark. Oh, there you go. You have a question?
Is it upgradable to different chipsets?
Not as smoothly as it should be. It's a reasonable question. That's pretty hardware specific. And I got closer to, one of the design goals here was generality. And the previous system was so nailed down that even reconfiguring signal paths around the network was difficult. This one provides me with audio and serial cross-point switches so that anything can be connected to anything, like cellular phone to helmet microphone, for example, is just a software event. They all have addresses. All the power devices have addresses. But the processors are still pretty deeply integrated and hard to upgrade. In fact, when I got the Spark Station, the IPC here, I wanted to get rid of the DOS machine. I have a little 286 that runs this VGA display here, but just changing that to the color active matrix display turned out to be impossible without remachining the panel. On the boat, the physical packaging of all that stuff will be much more flexible. So lessons learned all the way along the way is that things become obsolete with amazing speed. And we'll fix that.
We noticed that.
Yeah.
They told him he had a great job because he was high-tech, but he had no competition. TJ, you have a question?
I have two questions. Do you have any printing capability? And secondly, are you using Novell DOS 7 in your DOS?
Tomorrow he is.
I'm not going to...
Better DOS. It's a better DOS. I'm telling you right.
Noted. No, to answer the second question, no, I'm not yet. The first, we'll have to talk about that. The first question is I have two little printers. One is there's a little tiny HP strip printer in the console for generating things like business card images and receipts. I have on the cellular phone also, there's a credit card verifier so I can do book sales and things like that on the road. And people need a piece of paper. I also carry a little Canon, a little BJ10E bubble jet, the little one that looks like a laptop. So. I try not to spawn much paper, though. The stuff is awfully heavy. So it's, the ideal case would be one where that's not necessary at all. So, yes.
How did you get here?
I have from the parking lot, I rode it all the way from, no, I have, in San Diego, I have a mothership. I have a mobile lab and a 20-foot Wells cargo trailer and a diesel truck. I don't particularly consider that travel, and none of the travels with this were using the truck as a mothership. But to make it to a speaking engagement or some event where I have to rapidly relocate, I use that So I drove up from San Diego and parked in the parking lot and then had a real exciting adventure riding all the way from the other side of the, the hotel grounds. Yes?
The back corner.
What's been the best experience you've ever had?
This is it.
We feel the same way.
You know, that's a hard question. It really is. There have been so many. I mean, in basically 11 years of nomadness, there have been so many different kinds of encounters. Like best adventure in what category? You know, interesting human bizarre encounters, or new toys, or beautiful places. I mean, that's the beauty of the whole lifestyle is that there's this constant sense of change and evolution without it ever being measured in terms of getting someplace. So when you completely redefine your objectives in terms of open-ended, free wandering, then the great adventures happen all the time. And if something great's happening, I just keep it happening. So that's a very general answer, right? You're probably looking for something a little more specific. I can tell you a couple bizarre encounters. Probably one of the stranger ones was along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath. It's a 184-mile-long bike path that runs from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C. It's quite a treat. It's along the old C&O Canal, and the mules used to walk along there to pull barges. And so it's about 3 days without cars, and I was riding along there one morning, and there was an area near Big Pool, Maryland, where you can look across a big field and see Interstate 70 about 2 miles away, and there was all this activity over there, and apparently some semi had had a wreck and had tumbled down the side of the mountain, and you know, it was cops and traffic backed up. And the contrast between that and what I was doing was so strange that I just stopped abruptly, and I'm sitting there drinking water and eating a little gorp and sort of looking across at this spectacle, and I heard a rustling in the leaves behind me, and I turned around, and 5 of the biggest, meanest, toughest looking men I've ever seen in my life stepped out of the woods. So I'm, hello, and one of them said, "What the hell is this?" And I said, "It's a bicycle, and this is kind of like a race, so I got to go now." And another guy said, "You got a gun in that thing, man?" And I said, "No gun. I thought about it, but I figured it'd just get me in trouble." And he says, "Yeah, I heard that. That'll get you 15 years in Maryland. Just ask me." Now, I got to tell you, I'm cleaning up the language a lot here, okay? So just use your imagination. So I said, "So where are you guys from anyway?" And this guy said, "Oh, we're convicts from the federal penitentiary up at Hagerstown." I said, "Really? You escaping or what?" And he started to answer, and this other guy's giant. He's like bigger than me and much larger around and all muscly. He put his hand on my shoulder and says, "I think we ought to fix our traveling man up here, don't you?" So they all kind of nodded and laughed. Well, I ended up walking off with them into the woods toward this truck and off, you know, in that direction. And during the walk, I managed to conclude that they were a work release crew coming from the prison, in fact, to clean up the truck wreck. So I relaxed a little bit, but it didn't explain why they were wandering around in the woods instead of cleaning up the truck wreck. But, you know, I'm fairly happy-go-lucky, so I wandered off with them for a while, and we finally came to this little clearing in the woods, and there was this, back in the clearing, there was this lumpy mound about this high, this old musty tarp, and this giant the guy had been talking to said, "This is our stash, man. The truck was full of this." They were stealing stuff off the truck, hiding it in the woods, and they wanted to share it with me. This is wonderful. I started wondering if I was going to be living with them soon, you know? I'm thinking, I don't have much space. I can't, you know, whatever it is, computers. So he pulled back the tarp, and underneath was this giant mound of Sara Lee pastries. So he grabbed a box, shoved it in my arm, and said, "How's some walnut cake? This is excellent." And another guy says, "You don't be messing with no damn walnut cake. You want cheese Danish. That's where it's at. You want some of these apple things, buddy?" And before long, I had this armload of Sara Lee pastries while these murderers and bank robbers are all standing around arguing with each other over which ones are best. And so we finally went back to the bike with my stash and, you know, shoved it all under bungee cords and behind the seat. And, I mean, the bike was festooned with pastries, and finally off I went. It looked like a commercial of some sort. You know, I met a lot of strange people on this trip, but I think the convicts take the cake.
Yeah, right up here.
Yeah. What do you do when it rains?
I get wet.
Equipment is not sensitive to rain?
Actually, most of it is pretty well sealed already. I do have this Velcro here supports a fabric cover that protects the console because it's not waterproof at all. The CD player is in a nice sealed box. The rump, this is the rear unit of many purposes. I love it. There's really no choice. So it's pretty. Now the thing is, all these techniques for protecting this equipment from the rain just don't mean anything on a boat. You know, fresh water falling out of the sky in droplets, you know, that's pretty trivial. A pervasive, corrosive atmosphere of aqua regia, I mean saltwater, is another thing entirely. So on the boat, what we're doing is pressurizing the equipment bays, the console and the other stuff, running them about 3 psi above ambient with a little compressor and desiccant cartridge and all that stuff. And then there's a fine absolute pressure transducer, and if the processor ever notices a pressure drop uncorrelated with a temperature drop, then not only does it sound an alarm, but it outgasses and theoretically keeps the salt water out. So I'm about to get into a whole new set of packaging problems.
For those of us developing mobile computing devices, what should we do better?
Make them smaller. Yes. Yeah, smaller, faster, lighter, you know, that's the obvious direction. And you know, more and more as I integrate things, I'm finding that the whole exercise here, you know, this looks like this massive collection of wizardry. Well, it is, but most of it is other people's wizardry. If you really look at what I've done on the system, in most cases it's taken products made by other people and do as little as necessary to repackage them, usually replace inefficient power supplies with switching regulators, and interface them to something. And the easier that job is, the better. And a lot of things are made to be so focused as specialized products with no thought toward either future interfacing or efficient power and so on, that it takes more hacking than it should. Because there's a lot of system integration potential and things that weren't intended to be used as black boxes in other people's systems.